So bellies are full, and it's time for people to start getting a little sleepy. So we will try to make this one a little lively. So hopefully you will laugh a little bit. I want to talk about taking care of the team, taking care of the individual and the team, and to a little bit of an extent of the folks in the hospital around us, because the work that we do takes energy. And if all of our energy is going out and it is not coming back, we quickly become less good at doing excellent pediatric palliative care. So that's what we're going to talk about. So my disclosure is that I'm blessed to have worked on a team for the past 10 years. But this is my experience on one team. You will have different experiences. The other thing is we are by nature people, palliative care people are optimists. We are realists, but we are also optimists, and we tend to find the silver lining in the cloud, the beauty in even the most tragic situations. I want to let you know that I don't want to sugarcoat this. I think I'm going to talk about a lot of positive things, because I think those are mostly the things that I focus on and remember, but it is not all roses and easy path, okay? There are hard things, and what I want you to know is that I want to talk about the glass being half full, not half empty, but I want us to be real together about how this work is hard and there are challenges. And so if you are facing challenges in your work and you want to talk about them, I am happy to talk with you. So I want to think about the connection between burnout and resilience. And I don't know if burnout in the Czech Republic is getting the same attention that it is getting in the United States. But when I talk about what my CEO, Madeline Bell, wants to talk about, she wants to talk about burnout. And we'll talk about why. I also want you to think for the teams you're on, and if that is, you have a formal palliative care team for that team, and if you are a team of one right now, for the people that you would consider pulling into your team, how you are going to foster communication on your team, and how you're going to improve the cohesion on your team. And I will challenge you to think about what you will do in the next month. And I picked the next month very deliberately. It is a very busy time of year. There are a lot of things to distract us, but in some ways it is a very important time to be thinking about this, because it's cold and it's dark, and if you are not thinking about the joy of the holidays, you are probably suffering in silence. And so it is a really important time to think about communication and cohesion. So why do we need to talk about burnout? So we need to talk about it now, because right now you are a room full of excitement and potential, and you are ready to go. And that's when we need to talk about burnout. We need to stop talking about it when everybody's flame has gone out and half the people have left the room. So at the beginning is when you need to talk about burnout. We need to talk about it because it hurts the very people we want to help. So we cannot be our best selves for the children and families we care for when we are burned out. And once we recognize burnout, once you look in the mirror and you say, I am burned out, or you look at your colleague and say, they are burned out, you are fighting a fire, you are doing first aid, you are not preventing the problem. And we are pediatric practitioners. We like preventing problems. That's why we like vaccines, because we don't have to deal with the problem. So in some ways, the issue about burnout is important, but the issue of promoting resilience is even more important. So a few definitions quickly, and again, I am familiar with the literature in the US about this, but there may be some different literature internationally, and if there is, I would love for one of you to help me learn about it. But burnout has a couple components. You're emotionally exhausted, you feel depersonalized, you need to disconnect because it hurts too much to be connected, and you don't realize the value of what you're doing. You may be doing the same amazing work, but it doesn't feel amazing. It feels awful. It's different than depression, though it exists on the same spectrum. Burnout is usually confined to your work. At home, you are absolutely fine, but Sunday night you have the pit in your stomach and you do not want to go to work on Monday. Whereas depression, you are exhausted and depersonalized and do not see value in more than one domain across your life. And if anyone in here is feeling these things now, first of all, you're totally normal, and it's okay. All of us go through cycles of this, but what's important is to realize if it's happening, that you need to do something about it because it will not get better by doing the same thing. Oops. So what is in the literature about burnout? So in the United States, there's been a lot of attention paid to physician burnout. I would argue we really need to be thinking about burnout of all carers, teachers, nurses, social workers, and we'll talk a little bit about that data. But in 2011, and this is an impossible slide to read, and I apologize, but these are all subspecialties. Emergency medicine being at the top of the burnout chart, around 60%, and dermatology and occupational and preventative medicine being the lowest, but still at 30%. That's 1 in 3 physicians. Palliative care didn't have enough people to make its own markup here. So we're looking at the mean burnout among all physicians participating, 45%. That's a lot of people who are detached and who aren't their best for the patients. And the data gets worse in the US. So 3 years later, when they did the same survey, it had gone up. And so there are many reasons why this is happening. Is it because people are actually recognizing it, so they're reporting it more? Is it because people are becoming more sensitized that there is this thing? Probably some of that. But we had a big problem. So there was a study done in 2015, published in 2016, in the main palliative care journal in the United States. And it was worse for us. And what's unique about this is that this was not just physicians. This was the interdisciplinary team. Now, the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine is a physician organization, and it has a sister organization that is the Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association. So this is mostly physicians and nurses, but also has social workers, chaplains, and other folks. And the bad news is we are a burned out bunch. And it's worse if you are a non-physician than if you're a physician. So why might that be? And when this data came out, my team said, this doesn't surprise us at all. And I think for us, in the physician role in the United States, we have times we are doing palliative care, and we have times where we get to fly to the Czech Republic and come meet wonderful people and teach. Whereas my social worker and nurses and art therapists, their 100% job is providing care. And yes, we try to find spaces for them to breathe and teach and do those things, but I get a lot more of those breaks than they do. And so burnout in non-physicians shouldn't shock anybody that it's actually higher. And if you think about the things that cause that, we name similar things. It is the daily clinical work, it's compassion fatigue. Is that a term you have encountered in the Czech Republic? Can somebody give me a nod or a no? Compassion fatigue is where it gets harder to be the same whole person to people over and over again. The first hard family meeting, you are fully there, but by the 6th, you're done. Your bank is empty, but the people in front of you still need the same thing, but you just don't have it to give. And when you do this work over and over and over again, if you do not have time to recharge your battery, you will get compassion fatigue. And that's not because there's something wrong with you, that's because this work is hard. And it is sacred, and it takes energy. And just like any battery needs time to refill, so does your battery of empathy. I think one of the things that in each of these jobs, daily clinical work and compassion fatigue are big contributors to the reason for burnout. But each discipline, not shockingly, has its own niche burdens. So for advanced practice providers, so those are the nurses with prescribing power I told you about, and physicians, it's this balancing academic pursuits. It's how am I beholden to the medical school or the nursing school and my governing bodies and practice patient care. I have a chapter due and I have consults to do. Which do I do? And do I rob time from my family to meet both of those needs? You saw today some very dedicated people who translated an amazing book for you. They can tell you all about balancing academic pursuits with clinical work. Nurses and nurse coordinators talk about the complexity of care coordination. These children require a lot of energy to get it right. And there are a lot of phone calls and misunderstandings and wrong supplies ordered, and it takes a village to take care of these kids. And if you are the coordinator of the village, it's a really long day. Social workers also often are the folks on the team dealing with families not just through death, but after death. So the social worker on my team continues to hold grief with families for days and weeks and months after the child has died. I may answer the phone and hear a parent's voice and get to talk to them, but they're usually not calling to talk to me, they're calling to talk to Dana. But Dana is the one who sits with them as they process, how do I go back to work? How do I be a parent to my other children? And chaplains, and I would say this holder of spiritual distress is both chaplains and social workers, and also can be other psychosocial providers. So our art therapist, our child life specialist hold a lot of distress, especially for our adolescents who may be expressing things to them that they are expressing to no one else. So when you look at this list, this is a lot of the stuff we've talked about. Some of it may be more applicable here than others, but there's not enough of us. Our patients are complicated, and as we prove that we are good at what we do, people ask us to take care of more complicated patients, right? The reward for doing a good job is more work, which is good, right? We want everyone to have access to this, but if you're doing it well, people are going to ask you to do more with the same resources. And eventually, you either need more resources or you can't do the same that you've been doing. We've talked about care coordination. Financing of healthcare is very country unique, and as you know, the United States has a mess of a financing system, but what services get paid for and what don't is an important driver of what services we can get for families. We've talked about how communication is an art that we hold dearly, but it's fragile. And when you have a child that has 8 subspecialists with 8 different opinions about their organ system, you're doing a lot of communicating. And you may spend your whole day talking not to get anywhere. Anybody ever had that experience? Lots of talking, not getting anywhere. Okay. So sometimes the work we do, while it is important in the long term, is not particularly satisfying in the short term. And then on the personal side, we've talked about compassion fatigue. You know, all of us in this room have probably had someone say to us, oh my gosh, how can you take care of children with life-threatening illness? How can you do that? And we all have our own answers, but it is hard work, folks. You know, this is really hard being in the trenches with people kind of work. And so you need to give yourself permission that it will take some of the stuffing out of you. Sometimes we run into moral and ethical distress. There are many reasonable people who will make different decisions in medical situations about when to use technology and when not to. And if you come down on the other side of the coin of where a family is, even if you are fully committed to supporting their choice, it can be really hard. It's a lot easier to care for a family you feel in sync with than caring for a family that you feel out of sync with. And I think the difficulty in saying no and creating boundaries to protect ourselves and protect our team is a huge issue we deal with. So, as we talked about, the recipe of this is if we succeed, we get to do more work. But the other thing is if you think about the way the world has changed in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we went from a system of people using written communication via post or telephone to beepers, to cell phones, to more than one cell phone, to instantaneous information. So I'm here in Olomouc, 6 hours off of my time zone, but I still have people who are acting like I am instantly available to them. And that takes its toll, even if it's people you love, even if it's people you respect. But this instant need for communication has its price, and sanity is one of them. There's a ton of information, and I've talked to some of you about how, as different clinical fields advance, there is so much to know, and that makes it really challenging. And in palliative care, where we are caring for children across diseases, and these are rare diseases where there are people who dedicate their life to that disease, we need a way to keep up with what's happening in cystic fibrosis, what's happening in muscular dystrophy, what's happening in spinal muscular atrophy, what's happening in oncology. And it's a lot to keep up with because it's growing exponentially. And the reason we got to think about burnout is it means we don't take good care of patients. It means there are more medical errors, which is another thing that my CEO likes to talk a lot about. And it means that our empathy isn't as high. Now, I don't know about you, but one of the reasons that this work feeds me is because many days I feel like I gain more and learn more from families than I give. But there are plenty of days where I feel like my battery gets tapped. So I love this quote, and I use it to remind the people I train that when the well is empty, and you can't get anything out of it. You need to figure out how to refill it. So let's talk about resilience, because that's really where we need to be focusing our energy. And I love this definition: the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, or the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. So it's not about avoiding the stuff that's hard. It's about being able to weave and dodge and get compressed and go on. It's about being able to tolerate it successfully rather than avoid it. So this is a list of resilience skills from an article by Tony Bach, who is one of the gurus in communication in palliative care, talking about individual skills for resilience and workplace factors for resilience. And I respect Dr. Bach's work incredibly. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about this and about this, but we have not talked about this, which is how do we as teams foster an environment that allows people to have individual resilience. So I saw this diagram when I was thinking about how I would explain my concept of self-care and team care and how they're related. So I take no credit for this other than finding it using Google. But I like this because in the past when people have talked about self-care, they often talk about it like it's one thing. They do yoga, they go to bed on time, they escape to the mountains. But the reality is if self-care is one thing, and for whatever reason you can't do that one thing, you can't fall apart. So self-care really needs to be much more comprehensive, and for different people at different times of their life and career and stress, it's going to be different things. And so I am not sure I would have named all of these things the names on this slide, but I think it's a really good concept, so we're going to work with it. So systematic, which I probably would have called physical, but that's okay. I think about ways my team has done this to promote the physical health of the team. And there's a couple of things we do. One is that we try to be incredibly flexible with clinical coverage to promote exercise and to promote time with families. And so what that means is the call schedule of who has the phone that the hospices call, the phone that the families call, the phone that the ICU calls, is we figure out a day or two in advance who's holding that phone. Someone will always have the phone, but if I have the phone and my nurse practitioner has the phone, or my trainee has the phone, and my trainee says, I would really like to go to my exercise class from 7 to 8 at night, I say, sure, I will cover the phone for you. And when it's back to school night at the beginning of the year and I'm going to go meet my children's teachers, I say, I am leaving at 4:30 today and someone needs to cover the phone because I need to be there for my kids. And as a team, we have committed to do that for each other, and it has worked really, really well. It works well because everybody gets some of what they need and want. It also works well because it teaches people how to have healthy boundaries and be good mentors. So I'm really proud of the fact that I am teaching physicians and nurses who are training how to think about this flexibility, because this is the way you have sanity when you have a life outside of your work. I also think about modeling and prioritizing seeking healthcare. So as you may know, you are much more civilized here in the Czech Republic with things like maternity leave. Maternity leave in the United States is maybe 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks, but it's crazy. And so one of the things we try to do is be compassionate. When somebody is limping around the office, saying to them, you should schedule your appointment on the Saturday hours 3 months from now, isn't a compassionate way to care for people, right? It's not how we would like to be cared for. So when my fellow blows out her shoulder, I say, you need to go see somebody. You need to go see somebody when they can see you. Yes, I know you're on service, but we need to care for each other the way we would like to be cared for, right? The other thing my team does and has done very early on is we eat lunch together. And that shocks people, because in the United States, everybody works at their desk and does work while they're working. Now, Does everyone eat lunch together every single day? No. Sometimes I have a lunch meeting, sometimes I have but there is always a group of people who gather and eat together. And that, sometimes 15 minutes of sanity, sometimes 45 minutes of sanity, has been a life-giving force for our team. I told you there'd be pictures. We do a lot of food-related activities. So this is us making Chinese dumplings at my house for Chinese New Year. I also think about emotive or emotional health of the team. One of the things we learned far too late, so I'm going to teach you so you know it early, is there is a difference between venting and asking advice. Sometimes I have had a really frustrating conversation, and I just need to unload it because I've been yelled at, I've been called names by a colleague, and it feels terrible. I don't need anybody's advice about what to do. I just need to share it and get it off my chest. And sometimes I really need help because I don't know what to do. And we have learned on the team to say, I need to vent about this, which is code for, I don't want to hear your opinion. I just need you to listen, right? And we're palliative care people, so sometimes what we need is a compassionate listener. There are other times we don't know what to do, and it's okay to say, I am asking the group for advice. I need your input. And then the person has permission to ask. But that one change in our group really helped avoid frustration in communication. I've mentioned about time and space to debrief versus venting and asking advice. I also think recognizing grievances within the team is incredibly important. So we cannot model communication in times of peril if we are fighting with each other savagely in our own group. We need to be the grown-ups in the room. And so when I have a physician who comes to me complaining about what one of my trainees has done, and my trainee is complaining about what the attending is saying, the first 25 things I say to both of them is, have you talked to each other? You two need to go sit down and talk to each other. If I'm worried that there needs to be a neutral voice, I will offer to go. There are other people on the team to go. But no rumors around the office. If there's a conflict, people need to address it directly and with each other. And that's one of the things about the round table, okay? If the table has a head and everybody's afraid to talk to power, you got a problem. So I need to be able to hear from the social worker that I am not doing something I'm doing something wrong. I'm making something harder. And I need to be able to respectfully hear that. Now, I may not agree, I may have a different reason, but I need to be able to voice that back. And the ability to address conflict is hugely important. One of the things that may seem like a soft thing, but my new boss, who is an intensivist and a poet, brought to us, is she asked to end our interdisciplinary team meetings with a reading. And everybody rolled their eyes and said, oh, do we have to do that? And then people started to participate, and people brought all kinds of things, whimsical things, letters that siblings have written to siblings who are dying, thank you notes from families. And this has become, with a little, friction and a little, we don't like change, has actually become a really important tradition in our team. And so I would encourage you to listen to what the team's voice is saying and try it. Just try it. And sometimes emotional health, what you need to recognize is silliness is the antidote for sadness. So it's maybe hard to see in this picture, but we are all wearing pipe cleaner glasses. And Gina is wearing a sign that said, "We got the funk." And I came back from having a heart-wrenching discontinuation of ventilator in the ICU of a patient I had known for a long time to hearing music pulsing from the door of my office from 50 feet away, and being issued my yellow pipe cleaner sunglasses when we came in. And so sometimes being silly, remembering to play, is one of the things that we need to do for each other. Playing is really helpful. And if you think about the ways children deal with stress and conflict, they will grieve and then they will play. And they will grieve and then they will play. And if your team has not figured out how to play, and it may not look like this, I would never have come up with this, but Gina would come up with this. You need to figure out how to play. And that may be a whole variety of things, but you need to be able to enjoy each other's company and laugh a little. I struggled with this ways to promote self-care and luminescent. It's like such a lofty word. But I think recognizing that whether you define yourself as a spiritual person or a religious person, that being mindful, being present, prayer, if that's how you call it, meditation, if that's how you call it, is actually important. And for some people, it's being by themselves and taking a walk, and for other people, it comes with lots of other trappings. But there is a sacredness in the work that we do, and we are allowed to be with families in intimate spaces and hear really hard things. And I think just acknowledging that and acknowledging that we are the holder of something that is precious is an important part of the work we do. I put up some of my favorite meditation and yoga comics for you. I think, I talked about this morning about money and how we are often afraid of how to dialogue around money, but recognize that financial support, whether that's in compensation or in the support of something that is important to a team member, actually matters. So the ability to support a team member to go to a conference or to prioritize feeding people at meals, or if your art therapist asks for certain supplies to do certain kinds of projects with children, financial resources are one of the ways we show that we are backing someone. And so don't underestimate the power of hearing what those wishes are and seeing if you can grant them. You won't be able to grant all of them, but some of them may really let you do excellent care and help the team that you're working with know how valuable they are to you. I also think about, in times of crisis, lending support in tangible ways. One of the things my team has done, that I have both been a participant in sharing and I have been a recipient of, is tending to each other in times of crisis. So when my father died 2.5 years ago, my world turned upside down. And I was responsible to close his medical practice. I was responsible to make sure my mother got care, who was not able to care for herself. And I became saddled with that in a very quick amount of time. And my team rallied around me and kept me fed, kept my work at the hospital going, my responsibilities going, helped me close down my father's medical practice. And I am not saying that all of you will be called to do those things, but the team that can help each other in its struggles bonds in a very special way. And I have been able to repay that favor to many of my colleagues in a variety of ways, but tending to each other is essential to do the work that we do. So I've already told you about pizza, and to remind you about one of those special things that people asked for, our nurse coordinator is a very gifted photographer. And sometimes we have babies born in our hospital or children in our hospital who will never leave and will never have professional pictures taken. And so Gwen asked for a camera and a photo printer so she could give the gift of pictures. And a donor who said to us, well, what do you need? And we said, well, we would love to have a good digital camera and a photo printer. And they said, we would be happy to do that, and supplied it. And so now Gwen, whose job is not photographer-in-chief, but is our case manager, now has the ability to give this gift to families. It's a gift to the family, but it's also a gift to her, because she's using one of her hobbies, one of her talents, to provide excellent pediatric palliative care. I think with self-care, we often are thinking about the body, but I think feeding the mind is just as important. One of the things that gave a lot of life to our program is when we started doing educational didactics. Now, we started doing them with the adult program. So we do all of our learning both for our trainees and for us as a group with the adult palliative care people. It started out as a every other month seminar where we did 5 a year. It went to an every month seminar. Now it's every Tuesday morning from 8 to 9. We share the responsibility for staffing it, but we talk about cases, we talk about journal articles, we bring in speakers, and Tuesday at 8 in the morning has become a very important ritual for our team of palliative care. Now, we didn't start doing Tuesdays until 2 years ago, like every Tuesday. We didn't do it for a while, and then we did 5 a year, and then we did 10 a year. We grew into it. But figuring out a way to feed the minds of your team is really helpful. And encouraging your team to acquire new knowledge and skills. Someone who wants to become certified in hypnotism, send them. Someone who wants to be certified in massage therapy or acupuncture, send them. So if people are asking to develop new skills, figure out a way to do that. Attend a conference. There's a wonderful one happening, I heard, in the Czech Republic today. But there's amazing stuff happening in Europe. There are things happening in the United States. Many of them you can access virtually, even if you can't go in person. So there are many ways to get these resources to your community. And you guys are doing one of those things right now, so you should be proud. Think about people's aptitudes. So finding ways for your team to use gifts is really important. We often think about people being hired into a job, and a job has all these, we're cutting out. So thinking about not just what their job is, but what their gifts are, is really important. And that's part of developing people's knowledge, but also developing their passion. So I was really lucky because my early mentor looked at me and saw that I had a lot of energy for spending time with learners and could be patient forever with learners, and said, you should be the educator on the team. My colleague, who is very gifted with managing spreadsheets and budgets, which I am not, gets to do those. And that's a much better choice of saying, looking at people's talents and having them play to their talents rather than playing to the job description. When I think about talents, I think about my ability to tap into Gina Santucci, who is a nurse practitioner who founded our team, who now is at Texas Children's, and have her go teach at Salzburg. Because Gina taught me 95% of the palliative care that I knew, and when I had an opportunity to let her teach, I was certainly going to take it. And so sometimes this is figuring out how to lead from behind, how to promote the people on your team, to give them the limelight, and to have them rise to the occasion. Because when the team is better known and the team is respected, palliative care is respected. The other thing, and I don't know how well this projects, is recognizing that everybody having the same does not mean everybody gets what they need. And we think a lot about this in children with special health care needs, right? If you can't see, no matter what the box is, you need more boxes. However, we don't think about this in professions very often. And while we definitely need competencies and people need to be held to professional standards, it is okay for everybody to have slightly different things. Fair means everybody has what they need. It doesn't mean everybody has the same thing. And this is how I try to think about that when I am figuring out what a reasonable accommodation is. When we think about self-care, we need to think about relationships. You've already heard me say that people have to discuss problems directly. In my office, we call that "let's go have a cup of coffee." And that's not the cup of coffee you have with everybody on the team. It's Vicki and I need to go have a cup of coffee. And everybody knows that means we need to be left alone because we need to work through something. This is incredibly life-giving. It's also perilous. So everyone likes to know that when they are off, they are off. When I am on call, I am available. When I am off call, I am not available. I will say that there is a middle ground. So when we always have a team that is on call, but we have an arrangement where if you need somebody, you can call them. Now, if they decide to go for a run and not take their phone, they don't need to have it with them. If their phone is turned off, if they are out of the country, there is not an obligation for them to get back to you. But when your network gets big enough, usually there's somebody who's sitting on their couch watching TV who can talk to you. And we do not use this very often, but I will tell you, the times that I have needed this, because I am facing a symptom management challenge I have never faced before, I am facing an ethical challenge, and it needs to be solved in real time in the middle of the night. I am taking care of a patient that one of my colleagues knows incredibly well and has a relationship with, and I don't, and I need some information to help me. This is incredibly helpful. And it's one of the things that helps young teams where people feel less experienced feel comfortable growing into mature teams. In my 10 years on the team, I probably used this once a month my first year, 3 times a year my second year, and I've used it twice since then. But the 2 times I needed it, I desperately needed it, and so I am grateful to be that person for others. Does that make sense? Many people already have started to think about that, and it is not something that, for some people, it's a line that can't be crossed, but in some teams, this unofficial availability to just be a sounding board is critical. And also making time to celebrate. So we talked about playing and joy, but sometimes you need to just go have a meal together, or go to your fellow's wedding, or celebrate. And one of the traditions we have is at our annual meeting, we invite all of our alumni back. And alumni are people who worked with us before, who have taken other jobs. Alumni are people we've trained. But we make a dinner date with each other every year. And it's very social, and I look forward to it a lot. We also do a lot of work in that meeting. This is when we plan who's interested in what, who is going to do a conference proposal with who else, who can mentor who. And in this picture, I have 10 years worth of palliative care physicians training. So I have people who've started programs to mentor people who are starting programs. And so remembering that the people that you nurture, and they may be official or they may be the nursing student who hung out with you for 6 months that is now off doing something, that network is valuable and it's worth celebrating. And that's some of what you guys have going in here right now, is this network of people who are passionate, who have lots of reasons to celebrate and plan together. Sometimes thinking about the environment is helpful, and I think about this in we spend a lot of time inside boxes, and sometimes what you really need is to just get outside. So it's okay to send people outside to breathe a minute. It's okay to take the long way to the meeting. It's okay to breathe a little bit. The expression that helped me embrace this is that our names are human beings, not human doings. We are being, and so taking the extra minutes to be is okay. I also think about physical space, and thinking about how sometimes space is awarded by seniority. You have the most gray hair, therefore you get the nicest space. But that may not always be the best way for the team. We encountered this when we were moving from our tiny space that we outgrew to our bigger space. And the question was, it's on a curve of windows. And the question is, who gets the windows? Do you put all of the offices with doors at the windows and put everyone else on the inside? Or do you make the common space the space with windows and put the offices on the inside? And there was a lot of debate about this, but ultimately we decided that we all do better when we see the sun, and that our common areas were the places that needed to be lit, and that it would not be the physicians' offices that had the windows. And I will tell you that we had to repeat that 3 times to the architect, because that was not what they were expecting, but it was the right choice for our group. And I would just encourage you to think about, when you are planning this, what makes the most sense for the team. And your environment matters. Like, your physical space you're in matters. So we've kind of walked our way around this dimensions of self-care. I think some of them resonate better than others, but I think recognizing that as a member of a team, as a leader of a team, there are actually a lot of ways you can promote health and resilience in your team. And many of them, by promoting health and resilience in your team, also help promote health and resilience in you, which is a side benefit of promoting it for your team. Some people think about this concept of energy, made popular by Tony Schwartz. I kind of resonate with this concept, but I'm not sure how well it translates, but I figured I'd put it up there. When people are in high energy and high positive emotion, we are usually at the best of our performance. When we're at high emotion but low energy, our battery needs to be charged, but we're still okay. When we start crossing into the negative emotions, if we're high performance and negative emotion, we're surviving. And a lot of people will tell me this is where they feel like they live, but nobody really wants to live there. People want to live over here. And this is where things get dangerous, because the energy is low and the emotions are low. This diagram has some of the emotions that people have ascribed to these zones. I sort of find these helpful, but I actually like the one without all of the clutter more, because it just feels more visceral. But this is a favorite diagram of one of my colleagues, and so I promised I'd include it. So I want to just talk about 2 ways teams have restructured processes. Less about the how can we promote, but more about what a team did. The first one is about the team, the adult team next door to our team that we share didactics with, and the second one is about my team. So this is the Penn Palliative Care Team quilt, and it was a response of the team's process of saying we wanted to create something together. And they brainstormed, and their fearless leader, Nina O'Connor, happens to be a quilter. And so they decided that everybody was going to be responsible for a quilt square. And as you can imagine, there were some people who got real excited and pulled out their markers and pens and designed 6 of them. And there were some people who said, I have no artistic talent. I can't do this. But one of the beautiful things about this process And I am not saying all teams need to make a quilt. What I'm saying is that the team helped each other do this. And then it was assembled and displayed, and now even the people who grumbled about making the quilt show off the quilt. So thinking about ways as a team you can create things, whether that is a creation of time doing a charitable activity, whether that is a creation of art, whether it is reading a book together and discussing it. Thinking about ways you can co-create is one of the ways you can bring community to your team. And only your team will be able to figure out what the right thing is for your team. My team would not make a quilt, but the team next door did a beautiful job. The other thing is thinking about, and this is what our team did, is thinking about redesigning how your interdisciplinary team worked. We realized a year ago that the bandwidth of IDT was 90% physician. And it was called interdisciplinary team, but it was really lots of doctors talking to lots of other doctors while lots of other people sat around. And then some of our IDT members said, if I'm not going to contribute anything to team, I should just do my home visits during team. And we started eroding the team to a place that none of us wanted to be. And we all said, stop. We got to rethink how we're doing this. So one of the things is that the structure that worked for you before may be not the structure that you want to use now. And so it's okay to revisit format. Many teams will go through a discernment process of making sure everybody's voice is heard, making sure everybody's at the table. And I mean this figuratively, but I also mean it literally. We had a organizational psychologist from the university who became very interested in palliative care and asked to observe us. And we said, okay, we let anybody who's interested come in and see. And Kenwin came for 6 months and just watched and took notes and made some people very paranoid. And then he came to our annual retreat and he said, may I share with you what I noticed? And he said, some of you don't sit at the table. And we said, what do you mean? He said, no, some of you don't sit at the table. Why don't you sit at the table? And what it brought up was a lot of structural, nonverbal things that were really important to how our team functioned. And I think this neutral observer is incredibly helpful. Now, not all of you will have a organizational psychologist who raises their hand and says they want to come to your team, but lots of people can provide this. Visitors to your team sometimes ask questions, and you're like, well, why do we do that? Students are particularly good at this because they don't know your culture, right? They don't know where they're supposed to sit. They don't know what the rules of engagement are. So they will often have these insights, whereas we can't see them. Use these people to look at what you're doing and see if it's really meeting the needs of the whole group. And finally, I want to just talk about caring for the wider community. We've talked a lot about caring for the team very deliberately, because if you aren't caring for your team, you can't care for anybody else. You can't care for patients, and you certainly can't care for the other teams we interact with. But if you're caring for your team, you also have the ability to help the wider community be cared for. And there's a few ways our team has done this. One is informal debriefings, or informal and formal debriefings. So when a child dies on the floor or a child is admitted and is dying on the floor, we do a lot of one-on-one support of staff. That's nursing staff, that's the resident staff, the physicians in training, but we also will support whole clinical groups. And so there are times after a particularly challenging situation, a patient from dermatology with a blistering skin disease who died in the PICU, and dermatologists don't do death a lot in pediatrics. The dermatology team needed a place to process, and so we invited them to come, and we formally processed that death. So one of the ways we can help our colleagues is recognizing when they need help and offering them a safe space to do that. Outreach is another way we do that. We've talked a lot about education. Outreach can be a little bit different. There's a lot of education, but there's also a lot of how can I help you? So talking to the coordinator in our technology-dependent clinic and saying, what needs do you see? Sometimes just beginning those conversations is a really helpful way for people who are feeling isolated to feel more connected. And sometimes what we do is, the fancy name is acknowledging challenging circumstances. Gina calls this holding the suck, right? It sucks, some of the things that happen to kids and families, and it's very hard. And sometimes looking at someone and saying, you have done everything you can, there is nothing I would have done differently, it just is really, really hard, is actually a very powerful way to align with our colleagues and support them. So I'm going to challenge you to be less of an island and more of a community. And remember to take care of yourselves.